First off, welcome and thank you so much again to everyone for registering and attending tonight's events. If this is your first SDXD event, I'd just like to do a quick intro that we're San Diego's premier experience design group that specializes in fostering connection, inspiration, and education. Our goal is that you learn at least one thing you can immediately apply the following day at work, and I think tonight with Paige's talk, you'll learn much, much more. As you know, she will be presenting on bringing research findings to life, and just a little bit more housekeeping before we delve into the main presentation. I'm James, the president of SDXD, and I'd like to give a thank you to my fellow organizers as well as our advisors, and also to Tejas from UX Coffee Hours. If you aren't familiar, it's a platform where UXers can schedule free virtual coffee chats with experienced UX professionals across all disciplines, including design, research, writing, and program management. It's actually how we connected with Paige, and just a shout out to the incredible team of mentors for their dedication. I'd also like to thank our incredible sponsor, Tiled, who provided this Zoom webinar. Now I'll hand it off to Olivia from Tiled to tell you more about the company.
Thank you, James. This is incredible. Seeing how many people are here and on this is such an incredible community, and we are so thrilled that we are able to sponsor tonight's webinar. You guys probably aren't here to listen to me, you're here to listen to Paige. So I will briefly give you guys a little overview on what Tiled is really quick. So we believe that there is a need to have this new standard of new communication standard, and we believe that that is through microapps. We call them microapps, and technically what we're trying to do is to empower creatives to really be able to deliver interactive content without using any code. So if you want to go to the next slide, there's a lot of different ways that you can use a microapp, and from a presentation to a sales deck to a marketing proposal, website design, we have customers using microapps for so many different things, and it really is incredible to see all of the different things that they are using microapps for. We also have plugins with things like Sketch and Adobe XD to help you create microapps even faster. And there, like I said before, there really are so many different ways that you can use a microapp. And we would love to see what you guys want to create. If you guys are ever interested in creating a microapp, we do have a starter account option for just creatives. So only creatives can get access to Tiled platform for free to create microapps. So we would love to get in touch with a lot of you guys. My email is olivia@tiled.co. Betty is a huge part of SDXD, and you can get in touch with her too. But like I said before, we really just want to be able to help people create these interactive content experiences that help people inspire action, like I said, with no code involved. So thank you so much for having us. You guys are amazing. Like I said, what an incredible community you guys have started.
Thank you so much again, Olivia, Jeremiah, Betty, the whole Tiled team for helping us out, and of course, Shosh. So tonight's agenda is pretty straightforward. We'll have this incredible presentation by Paige, then we'll take audience Q&A, and then we'll have some optional networking at the end. So just a friendly reminder, please don't be shy. Feel free to engage, ask questions in the chat. We will be watching, we will be reading. And like we said, if you put questions in the chat or in the Q&A modal, we'll answer them at the very end. So without further ado, I'd like to give an introduction to tonight's featured speaker, Paige Bennett. She manages the growth research team at Dropbox, and prior to that, she conducted strategic research projects at Medium. Before that, she was the first UX researcher at Weight Watchers, where she went on to build their research practice and team. And incredibly, she began her career as a TV news reporter before then moving to the Middle East to conduct field research in the Gulf. So let's give Paige Bennett a warm, warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. I love seeing everyone from all around the world. That is amazing. I'm really excited to talk about this subject because it's one that I'm really passionate about. Like James said, I actually started my career as a journalist. And so this particular topic is really near and dear to my heart because it was actually so much of what I did as a journalist. I would try and find the story and then try and figure out how I could bring the story to life in an impactful way for my audience. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So it's really nice to meet all of you. This is my Twitter handle. You feel free to tweet me as well if you have any questions after this. Now, before we get into research, I wanted just to introduce you to two guys in my life. This is Finley, who's 3, and Theodore, who is 8 months old, and they keep me on my toes. If there's one thing that I've learned in my 3 years of parenting, it's that a lot of parenting is just like running after your kids, trying to decipher what they're telling you they want and figure out what they actually need. I wrote this list of all of the things that my kids were telling me that they wanted the other day. So this is Finley telling me that he wants to play with trucks and then not play with trucks. He wants my bagel. He wants to wear the socks. Wants to wear socks, but not the ones that I wanted him to wear. Run him on the kitchen. And Theodore wants to cry for me only. Now, here's the thing. This is what they were telling me they wanted, but what they actually needed was a little bit different. They actually needed to explore new things. The bagel that Finley wanted to take from me wasn't just about the bagel, it was about discovering what I had. The socks, wanting to wear a very specific pair, was about exercising his independence and having some sense of control. Running around the kitchen was about expressing energy. And Theodore crying for me was about his need for comfort. The reason why I point this out is that if I understand what my children actually need, it helps me to make sense of their actions, and it gives me more color about why they are doing the things they're doing and why they're telling me they want the things that they want. And that is not so unlike my job as a researcher. I mean, I spend my days trying to understand what the root satisfaction is of the customers at Dropbox. What are those underlying drivers that are propelling their actions, and what do they actually need for us? And Thomas Mann says it best. He says that people's behavior makes sense if you think about it in terms of their goals, needs, and motives, whether it's your toddler and your baby or the customers who are using your product. When you can understand what their goals, needs, and motives are, it makes their action make sense. And now, when I was first starting out my career as a researcher, I spent most of my time in this space. I was in that creation and discovery space of trying to figure out those needs, those goals. And that is a critical area to be in. But what I would do is I would spend all of my time in that space, and then I would spend a little bit of time sharing what I'd learned. What I want to share with you tonight and what I want to argue is that we actually need to spend as much time sharing what we've learned as we do in that creation and discovery space. It is so important to understand the goals, needs, and motives of the people using our products. It is just as important to really think about how we're sharing those findings. And for a few reasons. First of all, our findings must be capable of existing without us as their guardian. And there are a few reasons for this. You might not be the product decision maker. You might not be in those meetings where that product decision is being made. I cannot possibly be in every single meeting. And so the people that are in those meetings need to understand and be able to verbalize the recommendations that I have given them. You might change teams, or you might leave the company. And so this knowledge that you have gained leaves with you. So your findings must be able to stand up without you as their guardian. Now, for most of us, when you are doing work, I know many of you on here are designers, and so you've created designs for very specific reasons. Some of you on here might be researchers, and so you have these research findings, and oftentimes the end result is a research report, a report of some kind. Since I'm at Dropbox, we have a Dropbox paper doc for everything, and that's fine. But Reports are largely one-dimensional, and I would actually argue that right now, especially when a lot of us are working completely virtually, we are also competing with people who have a lot of mental overload. And so some days I can't remember what I read 15 minutes ago. So sending out a report is not enough. You can't stop it. You can't stop it there and expect that that report is going to really articulate the work that you've done. So tonight I want to share with you 6 ways to share your findings with stakeholders. And I also want to talk about why it's important to share your story throughout your process. So instead of waiting until the end of your work and everything is tied up in this pretty bow and it looks great, you actually need to be sharing about your work throughout your process. So we're going to talk about that too. Now, in pre-COVID times, I had 4 main tools that I liked to talk about. And in this crazy time that we're all in, I've added 2 more. So we're going to talk about workshops, exhibit pop-ups, collateral, and brown bags. And then we're also going to talk about 2 tactics that I call them that can actually be paired up with these other tools. We're going to talk about pre-reads and breakout rooms. So I'm going to go through why they're useful, and I'm also going to give you a few examples of those tools at work. So let's start first with workshops. Now, if I was in person with you all, and I really wish I could be, I would ask you to raise your hand if you have ever attended a workshop or if you've ever planned a workshop. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of you would raise your hands. There's a reason why many of us in the design world have attended workshops or have planned workshops, because they're really effective mechanisms to bringing your work to life. In a nutshell, a workshop is a way for people to come together to imagine, ideate, and create. And it's a really great place for your stakeholders to dig into the details. So you might think of a workshop as a design sprint, for example, but it's actually a great tool for sharing your findings because it creates this space for people to explore design possibilities as a result of your work. It also gives you a place for your stakeholders to get involved in a really meaningful way. And it inspires action by inviting them into your process. So I'm going to give you a few examples in just a minute, but I wanted to read this quote from one of the designers that I work with at Dropbox. She said, "Workshops allow my team to directly apply the research to our work. It's an opportunity to generate ideas based on the insights captured in that research." If you want workshops to be an effective tool for bringing your work to life, it should contain a few different things. So let's take a look at what those are. The first thing that a workshop should contain is a safe space to encourage creativity. So very often, the different activities that you're putting into a workshop are going to really push your teammates, push your stakeholders outside of maybe their everyday comfort zone. And so you want to make sure that the workshop is a safe space for them to do that. You also want a workshop to have very defined outcomes and goals. You don't want there to be any confusion about what they should walk away from that workshop having done and what those next steps are. So one of the things that you want is for your workshop to contain very clear what now next steps. You don't want your stakeholders to ever feel like, yeah, this was a great way to spend an hour and a half, but now what? Now what do I do with this? And finally, you want your workshops to have activities that build empathy, because the crux of having a workshop is for your stakeholders to understand your findings. And very often that means helping them develop empathy for the people using your product. So you want there to be activities that build that empathy. Now, here are a few examples of workshops that we've done at Dropbox and of different things that I like to put into these workshops. So the first thing is something we call suspend your belief suspenders. So when we were in the office, these were physical suspenders that I would have in the room with me during a workshop. And they actually are sitting in my desk now. And if I host a workshop, I will hold them up. This represented that in these next, however long your workshop is going to be, an hour or a day, during this time, we're going to take off our everyday position hat. And we are going to step into a world in which maybe we don't have the confines of technical dependencies. Maybe we get to think outside the box. We get to suspend our belief. Maybe I'm asking my stakeholders to role play certain customer segments. And so this is a nice symbol to represent that, hey, this place is safe for us being able to do that. For the next few hours, I'm going to ask you to suspend your belief a little bit. So it's just a really fun tool to get everybody comfortable with the setting that is a workshop. I will say that I like doing this also when I invite stakeholders in who maybe are not used to this kind of thing. So if you're working with stakeholders that maybe have never participated in a design sprint or really a workshop like this at all, it helps break the ice a little bit for them. Now, this is an example of a workshop that one of my fellow colleagues held, where she took her insights and she created user story cards from those insights. And then she paired her stakeholders together. So for her, that meant product managers and engineers and designers. And she had the PMs and the designers and engineers look at those story cards, and they came up with how might we's that they then presented to the group as a whole, and then they dot voted on which how might we's they wanted to pursue. Now that workshop had a very clear what next communication. They were going to walk out of that room with 3 how might we's that they would then pursue further. And it really helped to bring the stakeholders into the process, because by taking the findings and putting them into this user story card and then having them create how might we's from it, they were digesting the insights on a deeper level. One of the PMs I work with has said that how might we sessions give us time and space to quickly align cross-functional partners on what problem spaces should be explored and executed on. So immediately it takes your research findings from just, great insight to here are the recommendations and here are the actions we're taking as a result of those recommendations. This is another example of a workshop that 2 of our researchers held. Now, the story behind this is that they did this body of research that looked at what makes teams effective. And there was this one insight that came out of that work that they knew was incredibly important for the company to understand. And it was around the superpower that these teams had. And so they designed a workshop where they took this superpower, and everyone who attended the workshop was given that superpower. And then they had to find the other superpower match based on the insight that the researcher put on a card. And so you'll see they're like wearing little superhero masks, and they're walking around the room trying to find their superpower match based on the insight that's on the card. So immediately you see that the stakeholders are really like having to work through and digest that finding in a very creative way. It was open to a large group of stakeholders because she had designed it as such. And so what happened is that you had this great like cross-team collaboration taking place, and people had fun. This workshop is one that is still talked about today, even though it was done like 2 years ago, because it was so effective. So workshops are one of my favorite tools for bringing your work to life. And now that we're in a virtual world, workshops don't have to stop. We can absolutely do them. I'm going to talk about a tool called pre-reads, which is a really great addition to a workshop that you have to have now virtually. And I'll say that using tools like Mural can help you bring that those how might we activities into the virtual world. So pre-reads is something that can help prep your stakeholders before a workshop or talk. And I would say that they're especially important right now. I like them because they help to set context. They can be a place for you to maybe pull in related insights, and I'll give you an example in a minute. And they can allow your stakeholders to get a sense of your finding so that you can spend time digging in. So let's talk about our world right now. We're all working from home. and I want to hold a workshop with my stakeholders, and it's going to be an hour and a half long. In Zoom land, an hour and a half can be a long time because you are competing against all of the other distractions that are in the room or in somebody's house. So one thing I will do is send a pre-read beforehand that, depending on what I'm presenting, might pull in related research for them to have. Maybe it pulls in like context, lay of the land, or maybe I send them my research report and I direct them to read that before the workshop. So instead of having to spend my time during the workshop having to do all of those things, I can spend my time in the workshop really digging into the meat of the work. So a good pre-read should contain a deadline and clear direction. So you want your team that you're sending that pre-read to know, like, what are they supposed to do with it? You want to tell them, like, I want you to read this, and maybe come prepared with 3 questions, or I want you to read this and take note of it. And you need to give them a deadline. You need to say, I want you to read this by tomorrow morning prior to this workshop. Be very clear about this pre-read. It's supposed to be a tool to help you make the most of your workshop or presentation time. And here are some examples of pre-reads that you can do. Maybe you send out a pre-read about your tools and terminologies. We're working through a project right now where we have some jobs to be done that have been identified. And so a pre-read that explains what jobs to be done are and how you use them and why we decided to identify jobs could be very helpful. So send out a pre-read about tools and terminologies. You can also send out a pre-read of related research. So maybe related research about the area that you are working on would help your stakeholders get a sense of that space. You can send out a pre-read of, like I said, full research reports so they have time to read through everything. Our strategies or maybe even roadmaps. It's really a tool that can help your stakeholders make sense of that entire area so that your presentation and your workshop becomes even more effective. So here's an example of a pre-read that 2 people on my team sent out earlier this week. So they had a presentation that they were giving to their stakeholder team. So before they gave the presentation, they sent out a link to a doc that they had created that actually went through the different tools that they use. So one of those tools was the jobs. That was a really central part of their research, and it talked about what it is and how you could use it. And so by doing that beforehand, they were able to spend the time in their presentation on those insights and weren't having to spend time necessarily asking questions about, what is a job to be done and why did you decide that this is what you're going to use and how should we use this and how should we think about it. It became really a really helpful tool for them. Now, the next tool that I want to talk about are breakout rooms. And like pre-reads, this is, I think of it as a tactic almost that you can use with these other tools. You can use it with a workshop. You can use it with a presentation. So a breakout room is simply a chat room of like 3 to 4 people via your VC platform. You can have breakout rooms with larger groups, of course, but I'm focusing on 3 to 4 people because I want that breakout room to serve a very specific purpose. So breakout rooms can be helpful, especially right now, because they allow space for discussion questions. They can also prompt interaction. And I would recommend that you use that breakout room, breakout room would be really sad, a breakout room to prompt interaction, to make it a discussion. So a breakout room should contain, activities that require interaction. It should contain a thoughtful mixture of participants. So think about who your audience is. If you were doing a workshop in person or a presentation in person, you might be pairing up your PM and your designer and your engineer. But because you're doing this via your VC platform, via Zoom, think about how you can take that experience into the virtual world. Have a breakout room full of a thoughtful mixture of participants. You also need a timekeeper and a note taker because you want those activities to likely be time boxed. And so go ahead and designate somebody who will be the timekeeper and make sure that they're they're giving people time cues that, you have 30 minutes in this breakout room, or you only have 10 minutes left. Have somebody take notes, because if you have 4 breakout rooms, you cannot sit in on all of them. And there might be some really good discussion taking place. And so designate somebody as a note taker so that they can give you those notes back, and you can know what that dialogue was that was taking place. So breakout rooms are really great to use with a workshop or with a presentation to really spur that interaction. I know that right now, especially when you give a presentation, it can feel like you're giving a presentation to crickets. And so by having a breakout room and doing a prompt with your audience, it helps them actually dialogue your findings back to you. Maybe you do, for example, maybe you do a quiz where you quiz people on the presentation that they just watched, but you do something to spur that interaction. This is an example of one of our researchers named Megan, who did a breakout room by persona. She had identified different personas in her research, and so she created these different breakout rooms where she very purposefully put different people together. You see design, product, research, PMM, which is product marketing manager, or all together. And then each breakout room focused on a different persona, so they could really go deep into that and really talk about that. So we talked about workshops, and then we talked about pre-reads and breakout rooms as really good tactics to put into a workshop or into a presentation. Now let's talk about a tool that I really love called exhibit pop-ups. Now, exhibit pop-ups in a nutshell is a way to display artifacts from your work. So think about what your work is producing. And this is a way to display that in an exhibit-like setting. If you think about a museum exhibit, back in the day when we were allowed to go into museums, you would walk through different installations. And as you were walking through different installations, maybe you would pause and look at a piece of artwork, and you would really think about what you were taking from it and how you were feeling. With an exhibit pop-up, you're essentially doing that with your work. It allows people to distill and reflect on different parts of your work, and it opens your work up to more people. Now, this is something that I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what we did when we were in the office, but I'm also going to talk about a couple of ideas for you to bring this into Zoom world. So this is an example of a customer journey that was created at Dropbox. And when this was created, we made it very big and put it on a wall in a hallway that was adjacent to our cafe. And we did that very purposefully because everyone in the building, regardless of what team you're on, goes and eats lunch. And so after they ate lunch, they would walk past this journey and they would be able to see it. They would stop, they would look at it, they would be able to take in information that maybe was new to them. Maybe they were able to take in a bit of information that surprised them, or that they were, looked at some pieces of information where they thought, okay, well, that customer's action makes a lot more sense now that I see this journey. The reason why I love it is because it opened it up to everyone in the space. And it also allowed them to take their time throughout the work and really be able to reflect on the pieces that impacted them. This is another example of what we did. So we did our first piece of international research that we had done in several years. And we went to Japan, and it was a really important project because it was one of the first pieces of international work that we had done in a while. And so when we came home, we wanted to open up our findings to everyone in our office as a way to socialize them, but also to build excitement, because if there's one thing that we have learned from that project is that we needed to do more international research. And so we wanted to build this excitement and build this advocacy for that work. So we took our findings and we made them a bit larger, and we put them around the room, around a conference room. And we also we gave it a happy hour feel. We had some sake cocktails. We had people coming in and eating some snacks that we had brought back with us. What I loved about this is people who were not in our immediate stakeholder group came in, looked around the room, and were really excited. We had several people come up to us and say, like, we want to do this for our team. We want to do this for the part of the product that we work on. We got lots of good, intriguing questions. And people were able to, like a museum exhibit, walk around the room, reflect on the work, and really ingest the information. Now, I love exhibit pop-ups, and I cannot wait until we get back into a place where we're able to do them in person again, but that might be a while. And so in the meantime, a couple of examples come to mind. One thing that you could do to bring the spirit of exhibit pop-ups into the virtual world is to host a virtual happy hour, where again, you set a theme, make it, you know, a fun theme, and you have a couple of pieces of insights. You play maybe music that goes along with your theme. You have everybody come and just look and read and discuss, like a networking happy hour. The other thing that you could do is a virtual collateral tour, and we're going to talk about collateral in just a moment. But you know, let's say that I couldn't, you know, we had just come back from Japan, we had completed our project, and we couldn't do an in-person exhibit pop-up. We could have taken those findings that we put on the wall over here, and we could do a tour where we could serve as like the tour guide, and everybody who joins our Zoom link would be ushered through the different findings, like we were a tour guide, taking them on this fun virtual tour. So we've talked about exhibit pop-ups, and I mentioned Collateral. Now let's dive a little more into Collateral and why I love it so much. So Collateral, in a nutshell, is a physical artifact of your key takeaways. And what I love about Collateral, and I would say that it's my second favorite tool in here, is that it creates a top of mind reminder. And it can be personalized to your office culture. So one thing that you'll find is that you may have this really great work that you've done, and you give this stellar presentation, and then your stakeholders go back to their desk and they have a million different things that they have to do and a million different meetings that they're in, and they don't remember your work. I love Collateral because it serves as a reminder that's supposed to be in front of them about what your work has shown. So here's an example of some collateral that we created. We created stickers. So I had this research that had shown 5 different main insights, and I worked with my designer to come up with an illustration around those findings. And then I handed out stickers at my presentation, and people put them on their laptops. What happened was that this was a top of mind reminder for them. Every time they closed and opened their laptop, they saw it. But it also additionally opened up the work to more people beyond my team. So when they were in meetings with people, when they were working on their laptop in the cafe, when they were carrying their laptop, somebody from another team would ask, you know, what does this mean? Tell me about it. And then they would tell you about it. And if there's ever evidence of your work being successful, it's when you get to hear a stakeholder say your work back to someone. And so that was a really effective way of getting to do that. Listening to my stakeholders get to explain what that sticker meant to someone else outside of the team. So I love Collateral because it can do that. This is another piece of collateral that was created by one of our researchers. So she had this very complex research project that talked about the evolution of how a company grows, and with them how their usage of Dropbox can change and evolve over time. So in order to illustrate this, she and her designers created a flip book, and at her presentation she gave these out, and this is what it looks like. So you'll see it's a fun little animation of how this company has evolved and grown and changed. It was really cute and delightful and very effective. Everybody loved their flip book, and we would find people at their desks like flipping through the flip book throughout the day. That was really effective. It took a very complex group of learnings and put it in a vehicle that was able to seem fun and clear and stuck with people because they brought it with them. Now, I can't hand out a virtual flipbook to my team right now. Maybe I could mail it to their house, but that's a lot of money and maybe I don't have the budget to do that. So here are some ideas of how you can take that into your world right now. Virtual backgrounds, take an illustration. That illustration that I showed you of the stickers can easily become a virtual background. And you can send it to your team and say, hey, I would love for you to put this as your Zoom background for the next week. And they are in a lot of different meetings with a lot of different people that you might not be in meetings with. And that can become a topic of discussion. Plus, it's also in front of their face. You can also send out audio, video clips, little animations that can serve as bits of collateral for your team. Or a landing page. If you are able to, maybe you can't create an entire microsite for your work, but you can create like a landing page that you can send people to that serves as that virtual collateral piece. So I love Collateral because it creates that top of mind reminder, and you can really think of very creative ways to illustrate your findings through Collateral. Now, finally, I'm going to talk about one final tool that is great because it is very, very easy to do, and that is a brown bag. Likely, many of you might have attended what you call a brown bag. It's called that because you would have your like lunch in your little like brown sack lunch bag, and you would bring your lunch to that meeting. And the reason why I like it is because a brown bag is supposed to be a casual presentation or a casual meeting. Again, you like have your lunch with you, so you're eating, so you're not like wanting to talk, you're not wanting to present in a very formal way. And I like it because it asks very little of your attendees. But because it's a casual setting, it can facilitate deeper discussion. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Now, here I've noticed that like we have brown bags over lunch here, and we bring our lunch to our desk and we all are eating on Zoom. So it has that same spirit of it being casual that you would have in person. This is like a brown bag where people just are sitting around the couch, they had brought their lunch, and they're talking about the subject. Now, what I love about brown bags that I will emphasize is that it can facilitate deeper discussions. So here's what you can do. It's not meant to be a formal presentation. So maybe an example of a brown bag is that I hone in on 1 or 2 insights in my work, and I invite people to come to a brown bag where I really dive into those insights for like 30 minutes, and then I have a 15-minute discussion with the people that attended my brown bag about like what stuck out at them. Or maybe I have a brown bag where the entire brown bag is spent with people talking about the work. I send them a pre-read beforehand, and then the brown bag is just them bringing their coffee in front of their desk or the lunch in front of their desk and having a chit chat about the work that I've done. It's that very casual environment that's meant to make the attendees feel like they don't have to necessarily come with 5 bullet points to sound incredibly smart. It's just meant to be a conversation or a facilitation for deeper discussion. So each of these tools, while they're really great for bringing your findings to life, you always want to think about your audience. And so I wanted just to outline for you the different audiences that are best for these tools. So when it comes to workshops, pre-reads and breakout rooms, those are really good for your team and your stakeholders. Again, with a workshop, you're usually asking some significant amount of time. You're asking people to devote maybe more than an hour, maybe a whole day. And so you want to make sure that the audience for that are people that are critical to the work that you're doing. So usually your immediate stakeholders are the people that make most sense for that. Um, with exhibit pop-ups, it's supposed to open it up to people beyond just your team. So exhibit pop-ups are great for everyone. Collateral is something that's great for your team and stakeholders because sometimes they need to have additional context in order to understand that collateral. Now, like I mentioned with the stickers, that doesn't mean that your stakeholders can't explain that collateral to other people, because they can, and if they do, that's fabulous. But for them, they might need to have additional context about, like, what does that illustration stand for? And so it's really a tool best used for your team and stakeholders. And finally, brown bags are great for your team and cross-functional partners, I would say. It's a great tool to use when you want to bring in like an adjacent team that you'll need to work with in some form or fashion, or that needs to be aware of your work. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the budget and the resourcing for these different tools, because we don't all work with hefty budgets and we don't all have a lot of resources. I have been more than once a team of one with a budget of 0. So what I will tell you is that while you might not have a large budget or a lot of resources to do, say, a fancy exhibit pop-up, you can do at least one of these tools. Brown bags, for example, cost $0 and very little time and resources because they are meant to be casual. It for you should take up not a lot of prep time. And so brown bags are on the low end of the resource and budget ask. When you get to workshops, again, you're putting a little more time and effort into it because you have to plan things out. You might need to think about budget, especially in a physical environment where you might have to rent a room or food. With collateral, again, you're getting a little bit more up in the budget depending on what kind of collateral you want. And finally, exhibit pop-ups, the sky is the limit. So you can have a very budget conscious exhibit pop-up. The exhibit pop-up that I showed you actually did not cost much at all. It cost as much money for us to go to like Kinko's, which is our printing place, and get our findings blown up to a certain size, and a little bit of food and drink. And so exhibit pop-ups, the sky's the limit, but you can also do that on a pretty frugal budget as well. So if you take anything away from this, it's that there's at least one tool that you can use no matter what your budget and resourcing looks like. So we've talked about how to bring your findings to life, but I wanted to end my presentation today by talking about why it's important to share your work through your process. Because while the tools that I talked about are effective in making your work impactful, your work actually can be impactful starting from the minute you plan it. And the reason why it's important for you to share your work through your process is because it preps your stakeholders to support the outcomes and asks from your work. At the end of the day, I want my recommendations to be implemented. That's how I know I've done my job well. And that's the most important job as a researcher, is that my recommendations are heard and taken and implemented and create hopefully some positive change. So by sharing my work throughout the process and not just at the end when my findings are all pretty and wrapped up in a bow, I can prep my stakeholders to support the outcomes and asks from that work. So there are 4 ways you can do this. And I'm going to walk you through each of these things. And what I love about these tools is that they sit at different places of the process. So if you look at this is a stage in the process. So let's say that you've already explored the problem space and you've identified that you need to do work around this area. Now you're in the planning stage. In the planning stage, I'm going to talk about a tool called What to Expect. When you're in the active research stage, or you're actively designing something, I'm going to talk about a tool called Dispatches from the Field. When you're in the synthesis stage, there's a tool called Synthesis Building. And finally, when you're getting ready to deliver your findings, I'm going to talk about something called a highlight reel. So let's start with What to Expect. So I love What to Expect because, first of all, it's really, really easy. And secondly, it clearly outlines what your work will and won't do. So the What to Expect tool, but it's really just something that you you do at the beginning of every project is great because it sets expectations at the beginning, and it's particularly effective if there are lots of stakeholders involved in your project. So here's what my what to expect tool looks like. Before I begin a research project, I put a table in my paper doc that simply says what this project will address and what this project won't address. And the reason why this very simple tool is so effective is because I've set expectations at the very beginning of what my work is going to hopefully do. So if I don't do this, then what could happen is, let's say my stakeholder thinks that I'm going to end up with some insights around why somebody uses a certain feature. And my work actually wasn't about that. Instead, it was about what mindset that person brings to the table when they're considering purchasing something. If I outline it at the beginning, then my stakeholder knows at the beginning that's what it's going to do. If I don't, then I could get to the end of my work and be sharing out my findings, and my stakeholders going, wait a second, I thought you were supposed to understand why this person uses that feature. And suddenly you're in a boat where you realize that your expectations were not aligned. So what to expect sets you up for alignment at the beginning. The second tool I love is, and this is probably my favorite one of these, is the dispatches from the field. And I like this because it harkens back to my days as a news reporter. So dispatches from the field is a tool for you to update your work along the way. And it's particularly effective because it communicates progress when you've got a lengthy project. And lengthy in tech world is like more than a week, to be honest with you. So let's say you have a research project that's going to last 2 weeks. That can seem lengthy to some stakeholders. So dispatches for the field could be helpful. It also introduces people to the nature of your findings. So again, it's not a tool that you're going to use at the very end when you've synthesized everything, but it gets them comfortable with what is emerging from your work. And finally, it can start dialogue because they're starting to see like what the outcomes are of your work, what are some of the themes you're seeing, what are maybe some surprises that you've had, and it begins that dialogue. I'm going to show you an example that we used when we went to Japan. So dispatches from the field was particularly effective in this way because we had a couple of us that were on the field in Tokyo, and then everybody else was back in the office. And so for them, they could feel kind of removed. Also, because it was an international research project, it took a bit longer than maybe an average project where you're not having to travel. So we wanted to make sure that we were updating people along the way. So every day I would just put a very brief snippet of the day. I would say, you know, we did this, and I would put 1 or 2 pictures in, maybe a short video or audio clip, and the team would be able to follow along. What ended up happening is they felt like they were involved in the process. It also started dialogue as we were dialoguing, as we were able to show some surprising insights throughout the day. And you can do this not just with international work, but let's say you're doing a diary study that lasts for 5 days. You do one snippet each day of maybe one takeaway from that diary study. So that was dispatches from the field. And then the next thing is synthesis building. So if you recall the slide that I showed you where that you have the research planning stage, dispatches from the field is when, again, you're like in the middle of the work, you're doing the work. Synthesis building is a tool for you to use when you're in that synthesis process. And the reason why I like it is because it helps your team to piece together your findings with you. Now, I will say that there's a reason why you're in the position you're in. You are the expert. You are the design expert. You are the product manager expert. You are the research expert. This is not saying that you are not the expert in your field. This is a tool for you to bring your team with you, and you should serve as a guide in this exercise. So you definitely want to make sure you are guiding your team because you are the expert in that area. What synthesis building can do is invite many different perspectives into your work, which can be really important. It also can create visibility into your process. So I notice a lot of times researchers, we can invite people into the planning stage, and then we kind of go into this tunnel. and we come out with these findings. But for some stakeholders, it can be difficult for them to connect the dots and understand, like, how did you come up with this? And so synthesis building is a way for you to invite them into that process. And finally, it gives you an opportunity to generate decisions together, which can be particularly effective. Stakeholders who feel like they are part of the process are going to be that much closer to being brought in to your recommendations. So this is an example of a synthesis project that two researchers did. So they took snippets of dialogue from interviews and they posted them all along the wall. And then they brought different groups of people in, and those groups of people looked at those snippets of dialogue and they started grouping them together in themes. And they had different teams come in and build on one another. Those teams that were involved felt like they were in the process. Now, the researchers were looking at this as a guide. They were, of course, guiding that process. They were making sure that this work was done correctly. And they were coming up behind the teams and making sure that, like, yeah, these bubbles made sense. But the teams who were involved, they felt like they had such a voice in the process. So when it came time for these researchers to share their findings, can you imagine how those stakeholders felt? They understood where they came from. They saw that line that was connected and they felt like, hey, I had a say in this. So of course I want this recommendation to be implemented. That's why something like this is so effective. Now, I can't do this in person right now, but I can take the same context and put this in, like, Mural, for example, which is a tool that we use, and have them do this exercise through Mural. And finally, the last thing I'll share with you is something called a highlight reel. And this is an oldie but goodie, and it's effective because it works. In a nutshell, a highlight reel just simply showcases the most impactful parts of your work, whether this is snippets from an interview or specific designs, or you showing them how you got from in a wireframe to high fidelity to prototype to a shipped product. And the reason why I think it can be helpful for you is because a highlight reel is meant to be shareable with larger teams while also digestible. So when I put together a highlight reel of interviews, I'm not putting together a 25-minute video. I'm putting together maybe a 2-minute video I can share with all of growth, for example. And because it's 2 minutes, it's digestible and it is a low time impact. So I'm asking my team to watch a 2-minute video, which they have time for. They might not have time to watch the entire 1-hour interview, but they can watch a 2-minute 2-minute video. So the reason why I love a highlight reel is because it can, like, showcase that impactful part of your work. And again, it sits at the end of that process because it's a great thing to put with your findings. So I have a lovely, beautiful report of all of my findings, and I send out a 2-minute video that is easy to digest. And that's where it becomes an effective tool. So we talked about 6 tools to bring your findings to life. We talked about workshops, exhibit pop-ups, collateral, and brown bags. And we also mentioned pre-reads and breakout rooms as really helpful tools, especially right now. And then we talked about 4 ways to bring people into your process throughout your project. So we talked about dispatches from the field. We talked about what to expect. We talked about synthesis building. And finally, we talked about a highlight reel. And what it really all comes down to is this. Your work is about discovering user needs. And in order to do that, you're entering into their world. What you want to make sure you are doing is bringing their world to life. And I believe that by implementing even one of these tools that we talked about tonight, you are able to do that. And by doing so, hopefully you're making your stakeholders believers in your work, and they are going to implement your recommendations. It's going to be that much more impactful. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Paige. I have to commend you not only for the incredible content and delivery, but it is 7 p.m. on the dot. You did not end a second later or earlier, so kudos and much appreciation for that. We're going to delve right into the audience questions, and I would encourage anyone who has anything on their mind to please feel free to speak your mind, because here's your chance to get your question answered live. not like everyone watching on the recording, that we do love you. So the first question is from Kat in San Francisco, and she would love to hear more about the concept of suspend your disbelief suspenders and how that actually plays out in a workshop. Or is this more of kind of a mindset or paradigm?
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a mindset. The reason why we came up with this is because at the time we were asking these stakeholders to come into our workshop who did not come from like a creative designy background. And so the idea of like this workshop where they would have any sort of role play or do how might we's was very different, and they had never done something like that. And so we wanted this like symbol to be up in the room where they could be able to reference it as, okay, we're asking you to, for the next 2 hours, take off your business development hat and be in the mindset of this customer. And so it became this like fun symbol. And it ended up, I think, being a really, really fun thing that we liked to carry around us in our like research toolkit from workshop to workshop.
Amazing. Yeah, an additional piece of collateral and a reminder. And I feel like us as practitioners and UXers, it's easy to take for granted that suspend disbelief on feasibility and all those other constraints and considerations, but to have that tool and a term to communicate that to your stakeholders sounds very, very useful. We have a wonderful question from Jackie in Brisbane, Australia. In my experience, our lovely stakeholders don't always do their pre-reading homework. What are your strategies for balancing workshop activities that rely on this homework needing to be done versus those showing up without having completed it?
Yeah, I would say one thing is that you find an advocate who can emphasize the pre-read. And so in the example that I showed you, the PM of that group sent out an email behind that one that said, guys, this is really important. You need to do this before the share out. And that actually went a long way at them actually doing that. So having an advocate can really help to emphasize that. The other thing is make it digestible. So again, your pre-read might be your entire research report, but I found it's really effective when it's actually like adjacent things like relevant research or tools. And so you're not giving them this incredibly long thing to read, but make it where it's maybe like a really quick read for them, so that they'll actually it does give them more likelihood that they'll actually do it.
Great. Applying that empathy towards them as well. We have a question from Ken about how are PMMs, product marketing managers, involved during your process of sharing out research findings?
Yeah, so our PMMs oftentimes work really closely with us, especially because right now we're growth research, and so you think about where growth sits and how it's a lot about like who comes to our product and what's the marketing messaging that they're getting and how are they comprehending it. And so PMMs, it's really important for them to understand who is using our product and how they're understanding our product and the value proposition of our product. So we like to bring them in as often as we can because they can take those findings back to their own work and they're able to then understand like, this is what our messaging needs to say, or this is the value that people think Dropbox has versus the value we want them to believe in. Those are really important things for them to know for their job. And so we consider them essential stakeholders in our work.
Excellent. We have a question from Eduardo Hernandez. What's up, Ed? Nice to see another San Diegan. And he's asking, how do you describe the jobs to be done framework with stakeholders, and when do you use JTBD as opposed to other insight methods?
That's a good question. There's a lot of discussion about this out there. What I will talk about here is that we talk about what it is and when to use it. And so an example of how we've described jobs to be done is, we tell them it's this tool for identifying the need beyond use case and product. So with jobs to be done, we sometimes find that people use the terminology in the way it maybe wasn't intended to be. So we talk about like, it's this, what are they hiring your product to do, and when to use it. So it can oftentimes be used by a product team to refresh the way that they think about our user needs. It can be used to refresh like how we think about product and feature ideas. It can be used in marketing to help reach our customers' true needs. We have used the good old hammer example, where you buy a hammer not to hammer a nail, but to hang up a picture, and how they think about jobs. Um, and so that's a little bit of how we described it in the past. And I think we give examples to our stakeholders too of like, here's how you actually would use it. But yeah, I hope that
Great.
helps.
Kevin in Seattle's asking, how, if at all, do you alter your methodologies for sharing insights when your stakeholders are software engineers and DevOps professionals?
Yeah. I have found that seeing is very effective. So that highlight reel becomes a tool that can be very effective. Sending out a video of somebody failing at trying to, buy your product or use your product, that can be very effective. I think that when you do a workshop where your audience maybe is all developers, you really need to ground it in like the data, and also have some sort of like a visualization of like what's taking place. So maybe you do a highlight reel and you set the tone for like what are we seeing data wise about the area, and then you come in with like the user story card.
Awesome. There's a question from Kama about sharing photos and videos. What happens, say you're presenting to clients and legal advisors recommend that you shouldn't use that type of content? Do you have any recommendations?
I think in our case, like it's important to work really closely with your legal team and understand what you can and can't share. And you always want to get permission from your participants. So if you are going to be sharing a video from them, you want to make sure that that's part of your interview process, is that you would have permission from them in order to share that. I think it depends on the product you're working on, as to how complex it gets with what you're sharing. But you always want like personal identification information to not be front and center, to not be identifiable. So working with your legal team to make sure that you are protecting that, I think is really important. And then beyond that, making sure that whatever you have in place with your NDA or agreement that your participant signs, they know if you are ever going to want to use their voice or their picture.
Fantastic. Thanks for the great insight and also great question. Anna's asking about sharing out findings with teams in different time zones to the point where it's not possible to connect live. Is there more that we can do in addition to reports and recordings?
Yeah. This is where I like those tools like highlight reels, dispatches from the field, things that are, collateral, for example, like all of those are not time bound. And so I think that having a recording, but accompanied with something like a highlight reel and a piece of collateral can help connect those people that work outside their time zones. I mean, we have people who sit all over, and so I definitely understand that. And I think it's why you do have to look beyond just a presentation.
Yes. Bella has a great question. How do you deal with those tricky stakeholders who kind of consider these techniques as more UX theater than actionable, insightful methods?
That's a really, really good question. I think it comes down to your recommendations. So in all of these tools, at some point you are giving your recommendations, and those recommendations have to be, to a certain extent, actionable and tactical. So one way that we've dealt with this is by having our recommendations on a matrix of easy to implement to hard to implement. So it gives them a sense of, maybe your recommendations, maybe some recommendations are longer term. They're not going to see the results of those tomorrow. Some of these recommendations are shorter term. They can be implemented with very little tech dependency. So I think it's in how you center your recommendations, and in how you center the data. So you should be looking at, like, what is the data landscape, and telling that story together. And so centering it in that can also be effective.
Excellent. Sankalita, and I feel the same way, says that they love the idea of the superpowers workshop, and we're very curious. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that, how it's designed, and then what's its impact?
Yeah, I think the beauty of that workshop is that they had these, like, findings, and in the findings had this one finding that they knew was really essential and special, and they honed in on that one finding. And that finding was this, like, idea that teams that work well together have these, like, innate superpowers, so to speak. Maybe they have, like, great communication, or like, agile in the way that they work. And so they took those superpowers, and they outlined what they meant, and then everybody who attended that workshop got handed an envelope. And when they opened up the envelope, they saw what superpower they were and what the description was. And then they had to go around the room and find their superpower match. And so they had to constantly talk to other people in the room, describing that superpower without using that word. And what they were essentially doing was describing to them the finding. And so by the time they left the workshop, they really understood that workshop. And so that's what made it really effective.
Wonderful. If anyone runs a virtual version of that, please tag us and send the results. We have a great question from Mark, and he mentions how a lot of times participants in our workshops come with their own biases. Building empathy is so important, but what happens when that empathy isn't there? How do you get useful feedback from them when they might be tunnel visioned in on some specific solutions?
Yeah. I think it is helpful when you are designing a workshop that you aren't running and immediately jumping to a solution. So if you've ever been part of a workshop, it sounds like maybe Mark has, and I have too, where you're observing and people come in and the first thing they do is, like, jump straight into the solutions. That's not the purpose of this workshop. The purpose of this workshop is to help explain what you have learned. And so you want to make sure that you're not guiding them towards the solutions immediately. You're also wanting to explain the story of the people that are using your product and bringing that to life. And I find that oftentimes the way that they're using their product and the way that I am using their product are different. And so when I do tell that story to people, and when I show them, whether that's through a video or an audio clip, etc., those are all little ways at starting to explain that you are different from the people that use your product. Because you are building your product, you are different from your users. And so I will say that empathy is not an overnight thing. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, especially right now. It takes work. And so as a researcher, it's something that I am constantly trying to build in my team. And it's little things like workshops over time, collateral, highlight reels, etc., making sure that I'm the voice I'm bringing the voice of our customer into the meetings. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, but those tools are ways to get there with your stakeholders.
Fantastic. Yes, I used to have a Nielsen Norman Group sticker that just said "you" does not equal user on my laptop. And that was kind of my little collateral that I brought around. And to your point of working towards it and making it a continuous process, I remember one really great manager I had would always bring in little examples, wonderful examples of user-centric design, like a very well-designed tea bag or a bottle. And I feel like those are great ways to say, oh, this is an example where they didn't build for themselves. They didn't think from their own perspective, and look what happened. One question we have is just, how has your background in reporting and field research translated to your UX research career?
Yeah, I think that the passion that I feel for communication, I know how important it is. There was this saying in journalism school that you're competing with people's laundry. In other words, like when you're doing your news, people are folding their laundry, their heads down, and you want to write your story in such a way that they, first of all, they can understand it without necessarily having to look at you, but also that you are not boring them to the point of they're engrossed in their laundry and it's better than what they're listening to on TV. You've also heard like a similar example of like you're competing with the remote. They can just switch the channel at any moment. And so I think I feel similarly in this field. I'm competing with a million different paper docs and a million different things that people are seeing. And right now I'm competing with everything else that's going on in people's worlds. And so communication becomes even more essential if I want my work to permeate in people's minds.
Yes, so cool, the interplay of those careers. And as we discussed during the dry run, now folks are literally competing with people folding their laundry. So
Yeah.
it's so interesting. Jordan says that he really loves the use of collaterals and wants to hear more about conducting that virtual collateral tour that you mentioned.
Yeah. So, I would say this is where it's great if you can design or you can work with a designer on bringing your insight into some sort of like visual that's effective. And I would think of a theme, even if it's not, even if you didn't do, a piece of work in a certain place, think of a theme that you could apply to it. And I think have fun with it. And so by creating a theme around your collateral, you can bring people in. You can have music playing in the background, and as you are as everybody comes onto your Zoom link, you're role playing the role of like, I'm a tour guide and I'm going to show you 3 pieces tonight. And so you walk them through the first piece, which is maybe the visual of your insight, and you stop and you pause and you let people look at it and you let people ask questions, and then you go on to the next one and the next one, and then maybe you have 15 minutes at the end where you have all of the pieces up on your Zoom and people are just having a discussion with each other and with you. And so it is you're having to get creative, but you're trying to like bring that spirit of like that virtual, that in-person like happy hour into the virtual world.
It's great, giving that moment of pause to reflect and take it in, because that's one of the most challenging aspects of this virtual medium, right? Is only one person can speak at a time, whereas before you showed us that room and you can have many different wonderful exhibits and side conversations. So I like that structure and advice. Jonathan from San Jose's asking about your Tokyo trip and wants to know more about the bilingual nature. How would it have been different with more or fewer bilingual UX researchers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did work with researchers who are based in Tokyo, and we worked with several Japanese researchers who helped us with not just understanding the translation, but also the context. What was really key here is that because it was a research trip, we couldn't bring our entire office with us. So while we were there in person with these researchers, the team back home, it was easy for them to possibly feel disconnected, and we did not want that to happen. And so that's where like the dispatches from the field really helped to help them feel connected, and also to set like the context of what was emerging over those few days. For us, it was very important that we had a group of like bilingual researchers working with us on this. And so I think it absolutely made a difference, and I'm glad we were able to have that.
Fantastic. And we are coming right up on time here. So this will be our Last question, and I'm giving you a softball. This is from Ed. Awesome presentation. Loved all your content. Where can we follow you, Paige?
Yeah, so Paige Nomad Girl is my Twitter link. Feel free to follow me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Paige Bennett, and we'll be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn. And I also put up my email, pageb@Dropbox, pretty easy. Feel free to send me an email. I'm super happy to connect. I really love connecting with other researchers and other people, like other designers, other creatives. So it's really exciting. I look forward to connecting with you all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paige, for just an incredible presentation, sharing all your insights and experience with us. Please tell your husband thank you for taking care of the kids this evening. We appreciate his spending his time as well. Hats off and thank you to the team at Tiled, Olivia, Jeremiah, Betty, Shosh, for providing this webinar and making sure we can do this. And of course, to each and every one of you for staying this whole time, for participating, and for your continued support of SDXD. It really means a lot, and we really appreciate it. Stay tuned. If you're interested in networking, we'll be taking a 5-minute break, and then I will send out a link where you can join. And also, if you're interested in the slides and the recording, we will be sending those out in a few days. Thank you so much again, everyone.
Thanks, guys. See ya.